The deadliest famine in human history wasn't exactly caused by drought, flood, or war. It was caused by government policies. In 1949, when the Communist Party of China took power, it made a bold promise to serve the people. And for a while, that promise seemed real. There was hope. But fast forward just 10 years and that promise was buried under the weight of mass starvation.
Welcome to Unveiled History.
Between the spring of 1959 and the end of 1961, over 30 million people starved to death. Another 30 million births were either lost or never conceived during the time, but you won't find the word famine on their death certificates. Doctors were barred from writing starvation as the cause of death because it didn't look good, especially for a system that claimed to eliminate suffering. Till today, there's no official consensus as to what caused it, but historians point fingers at the same culprit again and again. Agricultural policies under Mao's leadership, collectivized farming, inflated grain production numbers, brutal punishment for dissent, all of it led to empty grain stores and starving villages. While crops rotted in government warehouses, millions died in silence, and perhaps the most haunting part is that many in China still aren't allowed to talk about it. Today, in China, this tragedy is still wrapped in euphemisms. It is called 3 years of natural disasters, or sometimes just the 3 years of difficulties. Now, it's true that China has a very long history of famine. With a massive population and a fragile farming system, even small shocks could lead to disaster. During the warlord era between 1916 to 1927, over 6 million died of hunger. In the nationalist period between 1927 to 1949, the toll rose to 8 million. However, the Great Famine of the late 1950s was deadlier than both of those combined. According to the official story from the Chinese Communist Party, the Great Famine wasn't anyone's fault. No policy failures, no mismanagement, just mere bad luck. The government explained that it was a perfect storm of natural disasters. And to be fair, there's a seed of truth in that. In mid-1959, the mighty Yellow River, Huanghe, flooded, swallowing villages, drowning thousands, and drenching farmland across 100 million acres. The crops were ruined and the damage was extensive. Then came more droughts, heat waves, typhoons, insect infestations, and crop disease. In Shanxi, grain output collapsed by over 50%. In Hubei, it dropped by 25%. The next year, entire provinces of Shaanxi, Hebei, Shandong, and Henan endured relentless droughts with harvests cut in half. In the south, the coast was battered by 11 major typhoons. By 1961, the north dried up under the sun, while the south drowned again in floodwaters. Independent weather records confirm these events actually happened. But the uncomfortable truth is that natural disasters didn't kill 30 million people. The bad policy did. Most historians agree that the weather was only the spark. The fuel for the fire, however, came from Mao Zedong himself, the Chinese politician, revolutionary, and political theorist who founded the People's Republic of China. In 1958, Mao Zedong unveiled a bold new vision. He called it the Great Leap Forward, a sweeping 5-year plan designed to catapult China into the ranks of modern industrial powers. Mao wanted China to catch up with the West, not in decades, but in a few short years. The plan was to mobilise the entire population and then treat labour like a weapon. But Mao didn't just want food. He wanted steel. His inspiration for this brilliant idea was a grand tour. After travelling across the countryside, Mao came back convinced of one thing: the Chinese people can do anything, with steel in their hands and fire in their hearts. If they could move mountains, surely they could transform an agrarian economy into an industrial giant in record time. To end this, millions of peasants and farmers were pulled out of their fields and sent to mine ore, cut down forests for charcoal, and build backyard furnaces to smelt iron. What they produced wasn't steel. It was useless lumps of brittle cast iron that were too weak even for tools. Meanwhile, back on farms, things were worse. Private food production was banned, communes were forced to plant less grain, and the state, hungry for proof that Mao's plan was working, began publishing fake harvest reports. Suddenly, officials claimed record-breaking grain yields. On paper, China looked like it was feeding the world, but in reality, granaries were empty and the villages began to starve. To make it worse, the government took more grain, using those inflated reports as justification, and moved it to the cities. Communal mess halls opened, offering free meals, but with nothing to cook. By the spring of 1959, famine had swept through a third of China's provinces. But what made this famine different? 3 words: omission, commission, provision. Omission because of the refusal to admit a famine was happening. There was no cry for help and no call for foreign aid, only silence. Commission because of acts of cruelty like banning private farming, confiscating cooking utensils and continuing to export food even as people starved. And then provision because the little food that remained went to cities, factories and the communist elite. The people in power never went hungry. This is a textbook example of what economist Amartya Sen called the politics of starvation. He wrote, "The direct penalties of famine are borne by one group of people and political decisions are taken by another. The rulers never starve." And in Mao's China, there was no one to challenge the rulers. There were no elections and no one was held accountable. To him, the Great Leap Forward was supposed to change everything. And it did. Just not the way everyone hoped. Instead of ushering in prosperity, it unleashed one of the deadliest catastrophes in human history. Tens of millions died not just from starvation, but from exposure, exhaustion, overwork, and execution. Families were torn apart, scattered across communes, and sent to different work sites. What once connected villages was erased in just a few seconds. Farmland was ruined by bizarre, unscientific agricultural methods. Trees were cut down en masse to feed the insatiable hunger of backyard furnaces. Some communes clung to hope, maintaining full rations and believing relief would come. But by the summer of 1959, the truth that the countryside was starving was impossible to ignore. Relief could have come at the Lushan Conference in August 1959, where General Peng Dekai dared to challenge the official narrative by criticising the exaggerated grain reports and unrealistic targets. But instead of listening, Mao turned the conference into a political bloodbath. "This is not just criticism," Mao declared. "This is treason." Peng Dekai was labelled as the leader of an anti-party clique. He was stripped of every position of power, never to return to the inner circle for the rest of his life. From that moment on, no one dared to speak out again. Out in the fields, the suffering turned surreal. People ate grass, sawdust, tree bark, and leather. Some sifted seeds from animal manure, desperate for anything with calories. In Sichuan, thousands resorted to eating soil. Dogs, cats, rats, insects, all vanished, devoured alive or dead. Soon, there was nothing left to eat. Famine edema swelled legs and bellies, malnutrition hollowed faces. Women stopped menstruating. Some developed descending or bulging uteruses from labouring on empty stomachs. The birth rate collapsed and suicides soared. Between 2 and 3 million people are believed to have taken their own lives. And then came the darkest part: cannibalism. It's hard to speak of, but harder to ignore. In Ningxia, Gansu province, dozens were arrested in 1960 for exhuming corpses and eating them, simply trying to survive. In Anhui province, over 1,200 cases of cannibalism were documented that same year. Child abandonment, forced prostitution, and parents killing their children, not out of hatred, but mercy, to save them from a slower, more agonising death. The cities didn't escape either. As supplies ran out, urban death rates doubled, but the government told a different story, blaming natural disasters and censoring anything that contradicted it. Propaganda posters painted a parallel reality with smiling peasants, fat pigs, and overflowing granaries. A state film even showed a commune flourishing livestock healthy, barns full, while in reality, children were dying just outside the frame. To fuel these collective miracles, 30 to 40% of homes were demolished for raw materials. Massive industrial projects consumed enormous amounts of labour and resources, producing nothing. And in January 1961, after 3 years of disaster, the government quietly shut it all down. Ironically, the famine ended not because of the weather, but because China quietly changed course. After 1961, Beijing abandoned some of its worst policies. Grain imports increased, causing starvation to slow, but the real shift came later. In 1972, after President Nixon's historic visit, the first deal between China and the US wasn't about diplomacy, it was about food. 13 state-of-the-art nitrogen fertilizer plants, designed in America, were ordered, and more followed. China became the largest producer of nitrogen fertilizer in the world. Then, in 1979, just a few years after Mao's death, reformers inside the Communist Party began dismantling the communes. By 1984, food rationing was gone. Farmers could sell again. All of a sudden, China's per capita food supply rose to nearly match Japan's. However, through 1959 and 1960, while famine gripped the nation, the Chinese government shipped out over 7 million tons of grain to foreign countries, enough to have saved an estimated 16 million lives. Between 30 million and 45 million lives were lost because one man tried to leap forward and drag an entire nation backwards. And that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. To stay updated with more exciting history tales, subscribe and share the video.